The air is thick enough to choke a man. 90% humidity. The heat is already rising from the jungle floor, turning the rotting vegetation into a steam bath. Second Lieutenant John George is crouching in the ruins of a Japanese bunker west of Point Cruz. His uniform is soaked with sweat. Mud is caked onto his boots. He is staring through a narrow slit in the concrete wall. He is watching a massive banyan tree, 240 yards away across a clearing of razor grass. He is looking through a scope that every other officer in his battalion has been laughing at for 6 weeks. John George is 27 years old. He is an Illinois state shooting champion, a man who has spent his life punching holes in paper targets on manicured ranges. But here, in the rotting jungle of the Solomon Islands, he has 0 confirmed kills. Not one. To the men around him, he is just another officer playing soldier. But the situation is critical, desperate. The Japanese have 11 expert snipers operating in the Point Cruz groves. These are not conscripts. These are killers, veterans of China and Malaya. They know every inch of this terrain. They know how to merge with the trees. In just the last 72 hours, they have killed 14 American soldiers from the 132nd Infantry Regiment. 14 men. Gone. Shot while filling canteens. Shot while patrolling. Shot while trying to sleep. George's commanding officer, Captain Morris, called his rifle a toy. He looked at the bolt-action mechanism and shook his head. The other platoon leaders made jokes. They called it his mail-order sweetheart. They asked him if he planned to hunt squirrels while the rest of them fought a war. When he unpacked the Winchester Model 70 with its Lyman Alaskan scope back at Camp Forest in Tennessee, the armorer laughed out loud. He held the sleek sporting rifle in his greasy hands and asked, "Is this for hunting deer, Lieutenant? Or are you planning to hunt Germans?" George answered quietly, "It is for the Japanese." But the Army shipped out before the rifle arrived. George spent the entire ocean voyage across the Pacific watching other men clean their standard-issue M1 Garands. He watched them disassemble the gas systems, oil the operating rods, check the 8-round clips, while his own weapon, the only weapon he truly trusted, sat in a cold warehouse in Illinois. He requested it be forwarded through military mail, a desperate request. 6 weeks later, in late December of 1942, a supply sergeant finally handed him a wooden crate marked Fragile. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the rifle he had saved 2 years of National Guard pay to buy. It was a beautiful machine, precision-machined steel, walnut stock. It weighed 9 pounds. The scope added another 12 ounces. The Garand issued to every other man in his battalion weighed 9.5 pounds, with iron sights. No magnification, no precision, just volume of fire. George's rifle was bolt action, 5 rounds. You had to manually cycle the bolt after every shot. Click, clack. It was slow. The Garand was semi-automatic. 8 rounds, as fast as you could pull the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. It was fast. It was modern. It was what the Army wanted. Captain Morris ordered him to leave the sporting rifle in his tent and carry a real weapon. "This isn't a shooting match, George," he said. "This is war." George listened. He nodded. And then he carried the Winchester anyway. The 132nd Infantry had relieved the Marines on Guadalcanal in late December. The Marines The old breed had been fighting since August. They were exhausted, skeleton men with thousand-yard stares. They had taken Henderson Field. They had held it against waves of banzai charges, but they had not cleared the Japanese from the coastal groves west of the Matanakaw River. That job, the dirty job, was left for the Army. Mount Austin stood 1,500 feet tall, a dark green wall dominating the island. The Japanese called it the Gifu. 500 men, 47 interconnected bunkers, hidden machine gun nests, spider holes. George's battalion attacked on December 17th. They fought for 16 days. 16 days of hell. They pushed up mud-slicked slopes under constant mortar fire. They lost 34 men killed and almost 300 wounded. By the time they finally took the western slope on January 2nd, George had fired his Winchester exactly 0 times. The fighting had been too close. Grenades, bayonets, Thompson submachine guns. There was no room for a sniper in a knife fight. But the jungle around Point Cruz was different. Here, the terrain opened up. The trees were massive, ancient banyans with roots like cathedral pillars. There were no bunkers here, no fixed lines. Just Japanese soldiers who had retreated west and dug themselves into the canopy. Some of them were snipers. They carried scoped Arisaka Type 98 rifles, 6.5 millimeter, smokeless powder. They tied themselves into the branches 70 feet up. They waited for hours, days, drinking rainwater from leaves, eating rice balls, waiting for an American helmet to show itself. On January 19th, Corporal Davis was filling canteens at a creek. It was a routine task. The area was supposed to be secure. A single shot rang out. Davis crumpled into the water, dead before he hit the stream. No one saw the muzzle flash. No one heard the report until it was too late. On January 20th, another sniper killed 2 men from L Company during a patrol. The men dove for cover, firing wildly into the trees. They emptied their Garands into the canopy, thousands of rounds, stripping leaves and bark. But they hit nothing. The sniper simply waited for the shooting to stop, and then vanished. On January 21st, 3 more men died. One of them was a sergeant, shot through the neck from a tree the patrol had walked past twice. The Japanese soldier had let them pass, waited for the rear guard, and then took the shot. Morale was collapsing. The men were terrified. They walked with their shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the treetops, waiting for the bullet that would end them. The Japanese snipers were killing them faster than malaria, faster than dysentery. The battalion commander summoned George that night. The command tent was dim, lit by a single kerosene lantern. Maps were spread across a folding table. The commander looked tired. His eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't care about regulations anymore. He didn't care about standard-issue equipment. He needed someone who could shoot back. He pointed at the Winchester slung over George's shoulder. "They tell me you're a champion, George," he said. "They tell me that mail-order rifle of yours is special." He leaned forward. "Can you actually hit anything with it, or is it just for show?" George stood at attention. He spoke calmly. He listed his credentials, not to brag, but to state facts. "Illinois State Championship at 1,000 yards in 1939, sir. Youngest winner in the state's history. I can shoot 6-inch groups at 600 yards with iron sights." He patted the stock of the Winchester. "With the Lyman Alaskan scope, I can put 5 rounds inside a 4-inch circle at 300 yards. Every time." The commander looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the rifle. "All right," he said. "You have until morning. Go out there, find them, kill them. Prove to me that thing isn't a toy." George spent the rest of the night preparing. He sat in his foxhole, ignoring the mosquitoes buzzing around his ears. He disassembled the Winchester. He wiped away every trace of cosmoline from the ocean voyage. He checked the bedding screws. He checked the scope mounts, tightening them until his knuckles turned white. A loose scope meant a missed shot, and a missed shot meant death. He took out his ammunition. 5 rounds of 30-06 hunting ammo, 180 grain soft points. He inspected each cartridge. He rolled them on a flat surface to check for concentricity. He wiped them clean with a rag. This was the ritual, the preparation of the craftsman. At dawn, on January 22nd, George moved into position. The sky was turning gray. The jungle was waking up. He crawled through the mud, moving slowly, inches at a time. He found a ruined Japanese bunker overlooking the grove. It offered concrete walls for cover and a firing slit facing the trees. He settled into the bunker. He rested the rifle on a sandbag. He adjusted the Lyman Alaskan scope. It had only 2.5 power magnification. By modern standards, it was weak. But compared to the naked eye, it was a revelation. Through the glass, the jungle wall transformed. He could see individual leaves. He could see vines. He could see shadows within shadows. The jungle was never silent. Parrots screamed. Insects buzzed like electric saws. The distant thump of artillery provided a constant baseline. George had learned to filter out the noise. He tuned his brain to a different frequency. He wasn't looking for the jungle. He was looking for the things that didn't belong. A straight line in a world of curves. A dark patch that didn't match the bark. A movement against the wind. He glassed the tree slowly. Grid search, left to right, top to bottom, sector by sector, branch by branch. At 9:17, he saw it. A branch moved. There was no wind. The air was still. But that branch had dipped. 87 feet up in a massive banyan tree, 240 yards away. George froze. He held his breath. He watched that spot. The branch moved again, and then he saw the shape. A shoulder, a helmet rim, dark clothing blending with the moss. It was a man. Positioned in a fork where 3 branches met. The Japanese sniper was facing east. He was watching the trail where George's battalion moved their supplies. He was waiting for a target of opportunity. A cook, a runner, an officer. He didn't know he was being watched. George adjusted his scope. He estimated the wind. Maybe 3 miles an hour from the left, 2 clicks right. He settled his cheek against the walnut stalk. The wood was warm against his skin. He controlled his breathing. In, out, pause. The Winchester's trigger was glass smooth. 3.5 pounds of pressure. No creep, no grit. Just a clean break. This was the moment of truth. The difference between the target range and the battlefield. The paper targets didn't shoot back. This one would. George squeezed. The rifle bucked into his shoulder. The sharp crack echoed through the grove. 240 yards away, the dark shape in the tree jerked violently. The Japanese sniper fell. He tumbled through the branches, crashing down through the canopy, snapping limbs as he fell. He hit the jungle floor 90 feet below with a heavy thud. George worked the bolt immediately. Up, back, forward, down. The empty brass cartridge spun through the air and landed on the concrete floor with a ping. He chambered a fresh round. He didn't celebrate. He didn't cheer. He kept his scope on the tree. He waited. Nothing moved. The sniper's partner would be close. Japanese snipers always worked in pairs, one shooter, one spotter. If George had just killed the shooter, the spotter was somewhere in that tree, or the one next to it. And now, that spotter knew exactly where the shot had come from. He scanned the surrounding trees. The spotter would be panicked. He had just seen his partner drop. Instinct would take over. Fight or flight. At 9:43, 26 minutes after the first shot, George found him, the second sniper. He was in a different tree, 60 yards north of the first one. He was lower, maybe 50 feet up, and he was moving. The Japanese soldier was trying to climb down the trunk. He was retreating. He knew his position was compromised. He wanted to get back to the ground, back to the safety of the undergrowth. He was moving frantically, slipping on the mossy bark. George tracked him through the scope. He led the target slightly, aiming for the center of the back. He exhaled. He squeezed. Crack. The bullet struck home. The second sniper arched his back. His grip on the tree failed. He fell backwards, arms flailing. His rifle clattered through the branches ahead of him. Both man and weapon hit the jungle floor within seconds of each other. 2 shots, 2 kills. George reloaded his Winchester from a stripper clip. He pressed the cartridges down into the internal magazine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The spring tension felt good, reliable. This rifle was a precision instrument. It didn't rattle like the Garand. It didn't jam with sand. It just worked. At 11:21, the jungle answered back. A Japanese bullet struck the sandbag 6 inches from George's head. Thwack! Dirt and sand sprayed into his face. The sound of the impact was louder than the shot itself. George reacted instantly. He rolled left, pressing himself flat against the concrete wall of the bunker. His heart skipped a beat. That was close. Too close. He wiped the grit from his eyes. He checked his rifle. The scope was untouched. The shot had come from the southwest. A new direction. A third sniper. He had seen George's muzzle flash, or maybe he had just guessed. George waited. 3 full minutes. He let the sweat run down his face. He didn't wipe it. Movement attracts the eye. Then, he inched back to his position. Slowly. So slowly it hurt his muscles. He raised his head just enough to look through the slit. He glassed the trees to the southwest. The shooter would have moved. That was basic sniper doctrine. Shoot and relocate. Don't give the enemy a target. But in a jungle this dense, relocation was difficult. You couldn't just walk to the next tree. You had to climb down, crawl, climb up again. It took time. George bet on human nature. He bet that the sniper felt safe in his high perch. He found him at 11:38, Third tree from the left in a cluster of banyans, 73 feet up. The sniper had repositioned, but only slightly. He had moved to a different branch on the same tree. A fatal mistake. He thought he was hidden by a screen of vines, but through the Lyman Alaskan, George could see the glint of sunlight on a rifle barrel. George put the crosshairs on the dark shape behind the vines. He didn't hesitate. He fired. The third sniper fell without a sound. He hung for a moment, caught in the vines, before gravity pulled him down. By noon, George had killed 5 Japanese snipers. 5 men who had terrorized the battalion for days were now dead on the jungle floor. Word spread through the lines like wildfire. "The lieutenant is out there. The guy with the mail-order gun is dropping them." Men who had mocked his rifle, who had called it a toy, now crept up to the bunker. They asked if they could watch him work. They wanted to see the show. George refused. "Get back," he hissed. "Spectators draw fire." He sent them away. This wasn't a sport. This was extermination. The Japanese snipers adapted. They were professionals. After the 5th kill, the jungle went silent. They stopped moving. They stopped shooting. They realized they were being hunted by something different, something that could reach out and touch them from 300 yards. George spent the entire afternoon watching nothing. He stared at the trees until his eyes burned. But the enemy had gone to ground. At 1600 hours, the sun began to dip. The shadows lengthened. George crawled out of the bunker and returned to battalion headquarters. He was exhausted. His shoulder ached from the recoil. Captain Morris was waiting for him. The captain looked at George. He looked at the Winchester. The mockery was gone from his voice. There were no more jokes about deer hunting. "Well?" Morris asked. 5 confirmed, sir," George said. 3 more possible." Morris nodded slowly. "Get some rest, George," he said. "I want you back in position at dawn." The day began with a torrential downpour. Heavy tropical rain hammered the jungle canopy. It turned the ground into a quagmire of mud. Visibility dropped to 0. You couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. George sat in the bunker, wrapped in his poncho. He cradled the Winchester to keep it dry. Water dripped from the concrete ceiling. The air was cold and miserable. He waited. Patience was the sniper's primary weapon. The rain stopped at 08:15. The sun broke through the clouds, turning the jungle into a steaming sauna. By 08:45, the mist cleared enough to work. George spotted the first target at 09:12. The Japanese soldier had used the storm to his advantage. He had climbed into position while the rain masked his movement and sound. Smart. This sniper had chosen a tree 290 yards out. Longer range than yesterday. Much longer. Also smart. They were learning George's capabilities. They were trying to stay out of his reach. But 290 yards was nothing for a Winchester Model 70. George adjusted his aim. He held slightly high to compensate for the bullet drop. He fired. The sniper fell. The 6th kill. But this time, the Japanese response was different. They didn't fire back with rifles. At 09:57, a whistling sound tore through the air. Thump. An explosion rocked the ground 40 yards in front of the bunker. Dirt and shrapnel flew into the air. Mortars. The Japanese had triangulated his position. They had spotters watching for his muzzle flash. They had calculated the distance. They were done playing games. They were calling in artillery to wipe him off the map. The second salvo landed 20 yards short. They were walking the rounds in, adjusting the range. The next one would be on target. George didn't think. He reacted. He grabbed his rifle and ran. He sprinted north along the tree line, his boots slipping in the mud. He dove headfirst into an old shell crater filled with water. Seconds later, the world disintegrated. 3 mortar rounds slammed into the bunker he had just occupied. Concrete shattered. Sandbags were vaporized. A cloud of dust and smoke rose into the air. If he had stayed there, he would be pink mist. He lay in the crater, gasping for breath. He checked his limbs. He checked his rifle. He was alive. But he had lost his primary position. The bunker was gone. He had to relocate. He crawled through the undergrowth, moving 120 yards north. He found a massive fallen tree. Its trunk was thick enough to stop a bullet. He settled in behind it. It offered good cover and a clear field of fire into the groves. The duel intensified that afternoon. The Japanese knew George was out there. They knew he was hunting them. Now they were hunting him back. Every time he fired, he risked drawing mortar fire or machine gun fire. He had to shoot and move, shoot and move. At 14:23, he killed his 7th sniper. At 15:41, he killed his 8th. This one had climbed 94 feet up a banyan tree. He had excellent concealment, but he made a mistake. The sun angle changed. It cast his shadow against the tree trunk. George saw the shadow, then he saw the man. At 1700 hours, Captain Morris sent a runner to bring George back. "Captain says, 'Come in, sir,'" the runner whispered. "You've been out here 9 hours." George crawled back to the lines. Morris wanted the numbers. George reported. 8 confirmed kills over 2 days, sir. 12 rounds fired, 8 kills, 4 misses. Morris shook his head in disbelief. An entire battalion had been pinned down by these men, and one man with a hunting rifle was taking them apart piece by piece. "Get some sleep," Morris said. "You're going back out at dawn." That night, George couldn't sleep. He sat in his tent, cleaning his Winchester by candlelight. He ran patches through the barrel until they came out white. He oiled the bolt. He thought about the mathematics of death. 11 snipers operating in the groves. 8 were dead. That meant 3 remained. Those 3 would be the best, the survivors, the ones who were too smart to make mistakes. And now they knew exactly what George looked like. They knew the sound of his rifle. They knew his tactics. Tomorrow would be the hardest day. George loaded 5 fresh rounds into the magazine. He sat with the rifle across his lap, listening to the rain start again on the canvas roof. At 0300, he gave up on sleep. He waited for the dawn. The rain started again at 04:15, a heavy, soaking drizzle. George used the weather to his advantage. He moved out into the darkness, looking for a new position. He couldn't use the bunker, it was a crater. He couldn't use the fallen tree, they knew about it. He needed somewhere unpredictable. He found a cluster of large volcanic rocks 70 yards south of his previous spot. The Marines had used it as a machine gun nest back in December. It was exposed, but it offered a commanding view of the grove. He wedged himself between 2 boulders. He pulled a poncho over his head and waited for the light. At 0743, the rain slowed. The mist began to lift. George wiped his scope lens with a dry cloth. He began to scan. At 0817, he found sniper number 9. The Japanese soldier was positioned in a palm tree, 190 yards out. He was low, only 40 feet up. This was unusual. Most snipers climbed high to get a better angle. This one had chosen concealment over elevation. The palm fronds created a thick, natural hide. From the ground, he would be invisible. But George was elevated on the rocks. He had the angle. He could look down into the fronds. He could see the dark shape of the sniper's shoulders. George settled the crosshairs. He controlled his breathing. His finger tightened on the trigger. And then he stopped. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The position was too obvious, too easy. George had been hunting these men for 3 days. The remaining 3 snipers were the elite, the survivors. They wouldn't make a rookie mistake like this. They wouldn't position themselves where an elevated shooter could spot them so easily. Unless it was bait. George lowered his rifle. He didn't take the shot. Instead, he scanned the surrounding trees. If the sniper in the palm was a decoy, the real killer was out there, covering him, waiting for the muzzle flash of the American who took the bait. George checked every tree within 300 yards, sector by sector. It took 11 agonizing minutes. Sweat dripped into his eyes. He forced himself to be slow, to be thorough. At 0828, he found the real threat. A massive banyan tree, 80 yards northwest of the palm. 91 feet up. The Japanese sniper was in a perfect hide. Vines and moss concealed him from 3 sides. He had a clear line of sight to George's previous position at the fallen tree. He was waiting, watching. George realized the trap. If he fired at the decoy, the sniper in the banyan would kill him instantly. If he fired at the sniper in the banyan, the decoy might spot him. He had to be fast. George decided to use their own trap against them. He aimed at the decoy sniper in the palm tree. He adjusted for wind. He fired. Crack. The decoy sniper jerked violently and fell from the palm, crashing to the ground. George didn't wait to confirm the kill. He immediately racked the bolt and swung his rifle toward the banyan tree 91 feet up. The real sniper would react to the sound of the shot. Instinct would force him to turn. That turn would create movement. George saw it. A slight shift in the vines. A flash of movement as the Japanese sniper turned to face the sound. George put the crosshairs on that movement. He fired before the sniper could even raise his rifle. The real sniper fell. His body tumbled through the air, hitting branches on the way down. His rifle followed him. 2 shots, 2 kills. In less than 3 seconds. But the silence was broken. George had revealed his position. Anyone within a mile knew exactly where he was. He grabbed his rifle and ran. He scrambled out of the rocks, moving east. He dropped into a drainage ditch 40 yards away and pressed himself into the mud. At 0834, the rocks exploded. Japanese machine gun fire raked the position he had occupied just 6 seconds earlier. Bullets chewed up the stone. Dust filled the air. The fire was intense, sustained. They were trying to turn the rocks into gravel. The firing lasted 17 seconds. When it stopped, George counted to 60. He crawled out of the ditch and relocated again, 100 yards east, into a shell crater partially filled with rainwater. He slid into the murky water. It came up to his chest. It was cold and smelled of rot. He rested the Winchester on the rim of the crater. He wiped the water from his face. 10 confirmed kills, 1 remaining. The 11th sniper, the last one. The 11th sniper would be the most dangerous. He had watched 10 of his comrades die. He knew George's tactics. He knew his approximate location. And somewhere in that green wall, he was watching. George scanned the canopy. At 0947, he realized his mistake. He was looking up. But the threat wasn't in the trees. It was on the ground. He saw movement at the very edge of his peripheral vision, 60 yards south, low, near the earth. A shape moving through the ferns, parallel to the tree line. The Japanese sniper was crawling. He was stalking George's last known position at the rocks. George remained motionless. He barely breathed. The Winchester was shouldered, but the angle was wrong. The rim of the crater blocked his view. To get a clear shot, George would have to stand up. Standing up meant exposing his head and chest to a man who made a living killing people. The Japanese sniper stopped moving at 0952. He was 40 yards from the rocks. George watched him through the scope. He could see the man studying the rocks, searching for any sign of movement. At 0958, he began moving again. He was approaching from the south, using the same escape route George had used. He was hunting George exactly the way George had hunted him. It was a mirror image. At 10:03, the sniper reached the rocks. He slid into the old machine gun nest. He took up a firing position facing east toward the drainage ditch. He was now 38 yards from George's actual position in the water. But he was facing the wrong direction. His back was exposed to George. It was a clear shot, center mass, 38 yards, an easy kill. But George hesitated. Something didn't feel right. This sniper had survived 10 days of hell. He was a veteran. Why would he sit in an exposed position? Why would he leave his back open? It was too sloppy. Unless there was someone else. George kept his scope on the sniper in the rocks, but he expanded his awareness. He looked beyond the target. If this was bait, the real threat was covering him. At 10:06, George found it. A second Japanese soldier, 70 yards northwest of the rocks, lying prone behind a fallen tree trunk. He wasn't moving. He wasn't repositioning. He was just watching the drainage ditch, waiting for George to reveal himself by shooting the man in the rocks. 2 men, not 1. The 11th sniper had brought support. Or perhaps these were numbers 10 and 11 working as a hunter-killer team. George made his decision. He couldn't shoot both men before they reacted. The bolt-action Winchester was precise, but it was slow. If he shot the man in the rocks, the man behind the log would kill him while he was cycling the bolt. He needed a different approach. George slowly lowered himself deeper into the water. He submerged until only his eyes and the top of his head remained above the surface. He held the Winchester vertical, muzzle pointing at the sky to keep water out of the barrel. Then he waited. At 10:13, The Japanese soldier in the rocks stood up. He had seen nothing in the drainage ditch. He believed George had moved further east. He turned and signaled to his partner behind the log. Both men began moving east, parallel to each other, 70 yards apart. They were executing a sweep, a classic infantry maneuver to flush out a hidden enemy. They moved past George's crater. They were now between George and the tree line. Their backs were completely exposed. George rose from the water like a swamp creature, slowly, silently. Muddy water dripped from his barrel, from his uniform, from his face. He aimed at the closer soldier, the one who had been in the rocks, now 42 yards away. George fired. Crack! The soldier dropped instantly. George worked the bolt, smooth, fast. He chambered another round. He swung the rifle toward the second soldier behind the log. The man was turning, raising his rifle to fire. George fired first. The bullet struck him in the chest. The second soldier fell. 11 shots fired over 3 days. 11 Japanese snipers dead. George had cleared the Point Cruz groves, but as he climbed out of the crater to retrieve his brass, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Voices, Japanese voices, coming from the tree line. Multiple men, moving fast. George had killed the snipers, but the snipers hadn't been working alone. An entire infantry squad was coming for him. The voices stopped at the first body, 42 yards from his crater. He could hear them shouting orders. Then they moved to the second body. At 10:28, the voices began moving again. But they weren't heading back to the tree line. They were heading toward George. They had found his tracks, boot prints in the mud, leading from the rocks directly to the crater. George checked his ammunition. He had 5 rounds in the Winchester. There were at least 6 Japanese soldiers. 5 rounds, 6 targets. And a bolt-action rifle against semi-automatics. The math didn't work. The voices were close now. 30 yards, 20 yards. He could hear the squelch of boots in the mud. At 10:31, a face appeared at the crater rim. A Japanese soldier looked down. He saw George. Their eyes met for a split second. George didn't hesitate. He fired from the water. The muzzle blast kicked up a spray of mud. The soldier fell backward, a hole in his chest. George worked the bolt underwater. He rose up. 2 more soldiers appeared at the rim. George fired. Crack! 1 down. He cycled the bolt. Crack! 2 down. 3 rounds left. He could hear shouting. More soldiers were flanking him. He scrambled out of the crater on the north side, away from the voices. He ran 20 yards and threw himself behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire erupted. Bullets shredded the bark of the tree. They struck the ground around the crater. They were firing blindly, aiming at sound and movement. George stayed low. He peeked over the log. He saw 2 soldiers advancing toward the crater. They were moving fast, bayonets fixed, 50 yards out. George aimed at the lead soldier. He fired. The soldier crumpled. The second man dove for cover. 2 rounds left. George heard voices behind him. They were flanking. One group from the south, another from the east. He was about to be surrounded. He couldn't win this fight, not with 2 bullets. He made his decision. Run. George grabbed his rifle and broke north. He sprinted through the undergrowth. Vines tore at his clothes. Branches whipped his face. He didn't look back. Japanese bullets snapped past him. They sounded like angry bees. Zip, zip, thwack. One hit a tree inches from his head. He ran for 90 seconds. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. He dove into another shell crater. This one was dry. He pressed himself against the earth and listened. Silence. Then, distant voices. They had stopped pursuing. They were regrouping around their dead. They had lost too many men to this ghost in the jungle. They weren't willing to follow him any deeper. George checked his rifle. It was covered in mud. Water dripped from the barrel. He opened the bolt. 2 rounds in the magazine. He reached for his stripper clips. They were gone. He had left his pack near the water-filled crater. 2 rounds. That was it. At 10:47, George began moving again. He didn't run. He walked. Slow, deliberate. He moved northeast, toward the American lines. At 11:13, he reached the perimeter. A Marine sentry challenged him. "Halt! Who goes there?" George identified himself. "Lieutenant George, 132nd Infantry." The sentry lowered his rifle. "Jesus, Lieutenant, we thought you were dead." He walked to battalion headquarters. Captain Morris was waiting. He looked at George's muddy uniform. He looked at the Winchester. "Report," Morris said. George took a breath. 11 snipers killed, sir. 12 rounds fired. 11 hits. Then a firefight with infantry. 3 more kills. 5 total rounds in that engagement. Morris stared at him. 14 kills. In 3 days. With a hunting rifle. "What about the weapon?" Morris asked. George looked at the muddy Winchester. "Functional, sir. But it needs cleaning. Mud in the action." Morris nodded slowly. "Get some rest, George. No operations tomorrow. The battalion is moving east. The Point Cruz groves are no longer a priority. Intelligence says the Japanese are evacuating Guadalcanal." George returned to his tent. He didn't sleep. Not yet. He field-stripped the Winchester. He spent 2 hours cleaning every single component. He removed every grain of sand, every drop of water. He oiled the bolt. He checked the scope mounts. He loaded his last 5 rounds. At 1400 hours, a runner arrived. "Sir, Division Headquarters wants to see you." "Who?" George asked. "The battalion commander, sir, and Colonel Ferry." George stood up. He wondered if he was in trouble. Unauthorized engagement, losing his pack, operating alone. He walked to headquarters expecting a reprimand. Instead, he found Colonel Ferry smiling. George thought about it. "I can try, sir," he said, "but it will require time, and rifles with optics, and men who can actually shoot." Ferry nodded. "Division has 14 Springfield rifles with universal scopes," he said, "left behind by the Marines, and I have 40 expert marksmen in the regiment. I want you to create a sniper section, train them, develop tactics, clear any remaining Japanese snipers." George accepted, but he had one condition. "I keep my Winchester, sir." Ferry smiled. Approved. Training began on January 27th. George assembled 40 men at a makeshift range near Henderson Field. These men were experts on paper. They could hit targets at 500 yards, but none of them had killed a man from concealment. None of them knew the patience of the hunter. George taught them everything: breathing, trigger squeeze, reading wind in the jungle. He taught them that the rifle was just a tool. The weapon was the man. On February 1st, George took 4 teams into the field. Their mission? Clear Japanese positions west of the Matanakaw River. George paired with a spotter named Corporal Hayes. They set up overlooking a supply trail. At 0720, a Japanese soldier appeared. Hayes confirmed. George fired. 1 shot, 1 kill. Over the next 6 hours, George's team engaged 7 more soldiers. 7 shots, 6 kills, 1 miss. The other 3 teams reported similar results. 23 Japanese soldiers killed that day, 0 American casualties. The sniper section continued operations through early February. By February 9th, they had 74 confirmed kills, 74 fewer enemy soldiers to shoot at American boys. On February 7th, George's luck finally ran out. He was operating near the Tanambogo River when a Japanese rifleman spotted him first. The bullet struck his left shoulder. It spun him around and knocked him into the mud. Hayes dragged him to safety. The wound was serious but not fatal. While he recovered in the field hospital, the Japanese completed their evacuation. On February 9th, the campaign was over. George was awarded the Bronze Star. But his war wasn't finished. He volunteered for a classified mission in Burma. With a new unit called Merrill's Marauders, he took his Winchester with him. It traveled from Guadalcanal to India to the deep jungles of Burma. It served him faithfully until the end of the war. In 1947, John George returned home. He put the rifle in a case. He went to college. He became a diplomat. He wrote a book called Shots Fired in Anger. It became the Bible of combat marksmanship. John George died in 2009. He was 90 years old. The Winchester Model 70, the mail-order sweetheart, now sits in the National Firearms Museum in Virginia. Most people walk past it. They see an old hunting rifle. But if you look closely, you can see the scratches on the stock. You can see the wear on the bolt. You can see the history of a man who bought a rifle from a catalog and used it to change the course of a battle. He proved that one man, with one rifle and enough patience, can stop an army. If you enjoyed this story, strike that like button and subscribe to Iron Witness, because history is written by the victors, but it's made by the survivors.